What are you doing with the Corcoran, and what is this new wing? How big is it? When is it going to be constructed? Maybe a little description.
How big is it? I knew you'd ask me questions. I don't carry those figures in my head. Damn it! It's a pretty major expansion on a piece of land that's vacant. It's a parking lot now. It's tiny, and it tries not to touch the existing museum. It does has to eliminate a few little icons here and there inside, but they're not that precious. It builds a lot of the infrastructure elements that are now being used, that are now in galleries in the existing building, that are being used for administration and stuff like that. So it releases, I think it's 17 or 19 rooms that are classical galleries that are not being used as galleries. The new wing allows that to be reclaimed and recaptured, and the museum will use the existing museum as a permanent collection and the new building for changing exhibitions. A big part of the refurbishing is to do something about the art school, which is here, which is crucial to the art school to be in the building, and it's something that's being lost in museums around the world, where as they expand, they push the art schools out to the suburbs, and the connection between the students and the art is lost, and so that's a pretty important issue here. So the art school is in the basement, and we've made it, as you enter the new wing, you cross on a bridge over a big glass skylight, which brings light into the lower levels and makes the art school a reasonable place to be in, because it'll get top light. And as an idea of as you enter a museum, that you see the activity of the art school seemed like the right thing to be doing. So that's what we're doing. The design doesn't look like anything that's in Washington, and there was a lot of concern, I guess, that the Fine Arts Commission wouldn't approve it. But J. Carter Brown was head of the Fine Arts Commission when we went through, and he did his due diligence. He spent a lot of time looking at models. He criticized things, and we talked about it, and in the end, they approved it.
Great.
So it's pretty exciting to be doing, having an art museum in the nation's capital that's substantial. I think it's a pretty important message culturally for the world and for the U.S. anyway, that there is some representation here of a very, very important part of our society.
Does the location of the museum being in Washington, D.C., both physical location in terms of topography and such of Washington, as well as, I guess, the sociological aspects of being in Washington, did that influence your design?
Well, I designed it from the inside out, so there was a definite program that David Levy, the director, and his staff developed, and we responded to that. The influence of design is, for me, is to be a good neighbor to the existing building and to the Union building, which is not such a great piece of architecture, I guess. I mean, depends on your taste, I guess. But since it's there, how do you make the ensemble of the whole block appear better than it does now? And that's what we tried to do. So it does respect, in that sense, the context. I think in scale and its respect to the context, when it's finished, even though it won't look like anything they've done here, it won't be a poke in the eye. It won't be. I promise that. Do I have time to take it?
But when you designed, do you have I guess, a expectation or a vision as to what somebody coming towards the museum from outside, what they would experience in seeing the design?
Sure, we do models and studies of all that. You can go up to there's an exhibit here now of all of this material, and you can see it for yourself. We've carefully studied all the relationships.
Is it supposed to evoke any particular thoughts on the part of somebody coming to the museum, or any reaction?
Well, I always think that a building should evoke some kind of emotional response, but I didn't plan an exact response that it should have. I'm not into that kind of control. I'm a control freak, but not that far. I just wanted to be I wanted to say this is a museum that shows contemporary art and American art, that it's a part of today. It uses technology of today, it represents images and issues of today, and it's not a historic, regressive kind of pastiche, which a lot of Washington has become. New buildings are sort of look like old buildings, and you almost can't tell where the old and the new started and stopped, and it's almost, if they continue that, 100 years from now, people aren't going to know, are going to say, what happened to the last 100 years? Wasn't there anything that represents the culture of the times? And I think that's dangerous. I think, and Washington is prone to that a bit.
As a place for exhibiting art, obviously the artist will benefit by exhibiting here because it's been shown that your buildings draw a fair number of people.
That's what the artists want to be part of, you know.
Right. And besides that natural kind of get more people in the building and we'll see the art, are there other aspects of design that benefit artists in terms of maybe the way their art can be shown, or light, or anything of that nature?
Well, we spent a lot of time with the lighting and the normal issues of hanging art, and yeah, a lot of, I do pretty well with that. I know that people think that the architecture may be overshadowing the art, or I've heard that about some of my stuff. The artists don't feel that way. I mean, that's somebody else's fantasy. My experience with the artists that I know over the years has been that they don't really want those neutral, endlessly nothing feeling rooms that are so deferential, there's nothing, they don't say anything. They'd rather be somewhere that is contentious, and it does have. Now, having said that, I make it possible for them to hang the art and to see it, and the context is important. The pristine white, endlessly perfected galleries don't work for all art. There's a lot of art that looks terrible in it. Then the galleries become a pedestal for the art, whether you like it or not. And contemporary art, most of it looks a lot better in the studios of the artists that are making it, because the studios aren't so finicky and fussy, and they're kind of relaxed, and the work can breathe in it. When the detailing in the architecture is so fussy, it does put a strain on looking at the art, I think. And I didn't invent that story. I can give you 10 artists that'll tell you that.
When you do a museum such as the Corcoran, throughout your life, I know that you have a lot of relationship with different artists, and you're an artist yourself in what you do. when you're working on a particular project like the Corcoran, do you seek out various artists to ask their opinion of what they might like to see in something, or?
Well, I guess I don't do it that way. First of all, I don't think of myself as an artist. I'm an architect. I respect clients and programs and budgets and time schedules and all that kind of stuff. So the idea of what's an artist, what's an architect, I've heard enough of that baloney that I'd rather not get into that. I'm an architect, period. I have been around artists for many years, of course. I mean, it's just like they've been around me. People who do things like we do are attracted to each other inevitably and talk to each other a lot. And so I've heard the gripes about museums and galleries over the years, and odd into the late night drinking sessions about what's wrong with architecture and blah, 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 blah. I got a pretty good handle on it, but it changes. It's never the same. It's not, you can't predict, I'll just tell you, there's a cathedral in Arnhem, Holland, that's being used as an art museum. It works fine, it was built as a cathedral. Is it great for the art? No, but it works. So you can put art in a lot if it's is forgiving. I think that it changes the feeling of it. I mean, the experience I had years ago with the Bruegels and the Kunsthistorisch, they knocked my socks off, the four of them that they own. And I went back 3 years later and asked to see them, and they were remodeling it. So they were in a room with a 9-foot ceiling, and I walked in, I was so disappointed. And it took me 20 minutes to overcome the environment so that I could just look at the Bruegels and enjoy them again. But so there is something to be said for how art is viewed. And my vote for contemporary art, and even for ancient 19th century and 18th century art, is to not fuss up the environment too much. Keep it kind of casual and I did some galleries for 19th century paintings at the Simon. I remodeled all of that some years ago. And there's some basic rules, but it didn't get fussy. It kind of works.
Mm-hmm. In the Corcoran wing, are there any new technologies that you're employing, or energy-saving devices, or anything that for the architects out there that would excite them?
Well, we're using CATIA software as modified by my firm over the last 25 years. So it's a proprietary software now. We're using that and have used that to do the design and the documentation of the building. And that's a kind of a whole thing to talk about somewhere over the rainbow. But internally, there's very few breakthroughs in lighting systems, or, we try to use energy efficient stuff, and as best you can. It's hard to do it with an old building attached, but we're doing some of those things, and as we can. Track lighting and things like that are pretty much been around for years. Nobody's really. I've tried to improve on it, actually, and I've been thwarted many times. I tried to light galleries indirectly, so that you don't see the light source. The room's just lit, and it's been interesting. But in the end, it doesn't work as good as the track lighting. So I kind of gave up on it. I did a footlight thing, which had the advantage of being the guard that kept you away from the painting. So if you had a fragile painting like Ellsworth Kelly, and you put a footlight on it, and you lit it from the bottom up, you can light it perfectly, and the footlight keeps people away from touching the painting, which works for Ellsworth Kelly and paintings that don't have a heavy impasto on them. But as soon as you get any texture on the painting, it's like you're putting a light, the effect you get when you put a light under your face and you get the shadows going up. Yeah. So there's no real system. I think I just did a building at MIT for the guys that do all the latest gadgetry and cell phones and photography and sound systems and all that. And it's their offices. And they, over the time working with them, they told me all the newest gadgets they had. And I was so excited that I was going to be able to use this in their office. When we got down to the short strokes, as it were, and they asked for the same old switches, the same old, and it was unbelievable. I looked at them and I said, wait a minute, yeah, but, you know, this is what we want. I think someday there'll be a breakthrough of some kind. I don't know what, but things keep changing, so maybe.
Mm-hmm. So speaking of changing.
Okay, we are rolling.
Okay, thanks. I want to ask you about the exterior of the building, and I guess first question is the material that kind of wraps around. What is that?
Well, so far it's stainless steel, which is what I used on the Walt Disney Concert Hall, and it's flat. It's flat. It's not oil canning. It's tight, like an airplane.
And over time, will that change its appearance, or should it stay pretty much like it looks when first day of opening?
Yeah, it doesn't change. It gets dirty.
Mm-hmm.
You have to wash it off sometime. No, it wouldn't. It's pretty stable stuff. If it's near the ocean, stainless steel will get a little rust, but I don't think it would happen in this application.
Mm-hmm. I wanted to ask you a little bit about some of the influences on your work through the years. You've mentioned various artists. Are there particular artists that have influenced you, and is there also, sort of a separate question, but is there particular music that influences you, either in general or in specific projects?
Can I go into my pocket and get something out?
Sure, I think.
I don't know if I still got it. Nah, I don't. They took it away from me. When I was 25 years old, I played in a Gagaku orchestra. You know what that is?
Not a lot, but I've read a little bit about it.
Imperial court music. So it's 1,000-year-old music. And there was a class in it at UCLA in the ethnomusicology department. And I was fascinated with Japanese architecture and art, and therefore became interested in the music. And I had an opportunity to be part of this orchestra, though I'm not a musician. The thing that excited me about it was that it was a stylized form that was very precise, very detailed, very compulsive, and yet it exuded passion. And so what I got out of it is, if you're aware of it, you can be a control freak. You can get things exactly the way you want them without cleansing it of all the spirit. And that's something that I took away from that experience, and I've held that idea. And the person in contemporary music who most represents that to me is Pierre Boulez. When I 30 years ago, when I first watched him conduct, it was the same phenomenon. And then years later, we've become friends, and and talked about it. And he is a control freak, as I am, and he works very tightly. His conducting is within a box like that. He's not out here like Lenny Bernstein was. And yet there's an extraordinary passion in the work, and I'm attracted to that idea. And so people think that I take paper and squash it up and that's the building. And I guess that's exactly what I want them to think. Except what they don't get is how the process that gets me to something that gives them that impression, and how controlled an effort that is to get there, and what it takes to make a building that is casual. Because buildings have to go through a sieve of thousands of people from the basic idea to the execution. And on the way, there's many ways to trip and to get and to lose the energy and the feeling about it. And that's something I focus on, and it absolutely takes, I think, a major control freak effort to accomplish it, and within budgets and so on. So that's what led me to all this computer stuff, which I don't know how to turn on, and those kind of things. The art, my own interest in painting, sculpture, and music and literature and politics, especially today, and politics, fuels the fire, keeps me going. But and I wouldn't say any particular artist had an effect on me or not. I can tell you some incidents of when I started practicing architecture in California as a kid, 1962, 60, in that area. My first works turned off my architecture colleagues. They thought I was some kind of Martian. And as a result, I couldn't hang out with them. There was no way to feel comfortable in that environment. As my buildings were going up, I noticed some funny people hanging around looking at them. It turned out to be Ed Moses and Larry Bell and Kenny Price, and whose work I knew. And I was kind of interested that they were interested, and I was interested in them, they were interested in me. And so that became my gang. And it has to this day. The same people we're still close friends. And so I guess I learned from them a kind of an ability to go beyond, to first of all be able to express yourself and not second guess everything you did, just let things unfold, to be more hands-on with technology and processes, and not, I came from a Jewish Talmudic background, so questioning everything is certainly in my psyche and DNA from the beginning. So this group gave me spirit and hope and help, and of course led me to lots of nice art parties and wonderful events, and trading art and trading with them for my work and their work, and as a result, one major breakthrough was when I first started out. I was trying to do all this fussy detailing that you're trained to do, and the work I was getting, I couldn't get budgets to do it, and you were always fighting this lack of craft that it didn't, didn't exist at this price range. You could get it if you had a very wealthy budget. And I was looking at Rauschenberg and Johns and Carl Andre and Don Judd, and I saw people making art that people were interested in with sort of junk. And I said, so what if you don't try to get this work? What if you just use this carpentry the way it comes out with all the bad workmanship and turn it into a virtue? And it was the artist, my realization of that said, okay, let's just expose the studs and hang the stuff and do the things that started working for me. And I still like that stuff, although it got me in trouble because after 10 years of doing that stuff, when I was getting ready to graduate to do bigger work, I was poo-pooed because everybody thought I was going to use raw plywood and chain link fence and corrugated metal for the Disney Concert Hall when I was interviewed for that. They brought that up, that issue, and of course that stuff haunted me for a while. Now they've gotten over that. They found other things to worry about.
I wanted to ask you about when you talk to students, is there particular advice you give students or even young children in what they should be looking for or thinking about in life?
I have in the past taught in the elementary school. My sister is an elementary school teacher, and she dragged me to the classroom. I even did a class at the Smithsonian once here. You know, when kids, this happened the other day, really graphically. I was called back to my grade school in Toronto, Canada. They had a little event for me, and I went. And Canadian grade school is kindergarten to grade 8. And so each of the classes made a construction in the corridor as I entered, which represented their interpretation of my work. And the best stuff was the kindergarten, because it was loose and I was with a museum director from the AGO, and I said, "You would show that, right?" And he said, "Yes." And then each year it got successively more anal and controlled and not. And I've had that experience teaching kids in the elementary schools, that the rules come in so quickly that you lose the spontaneity and lose the character. And there are a lot of kids that don't have, that are visual, that can develop a visual intellect, who don't have the ability to do the other things, you know. So I think the education system doesn't factor in these different kinds of talents, and so the kids that have an art ability are shortchanged in the education system. I tell kids and I tell my students that they should not look over their shoulder. They should be themselves and find their own way, and that they will slowly realize that they will become the expert in their work, and that nobody else is an expert in their work, and that they will have, and so it doesn't matter what somebody else says. I mean, yeah, maybe they won't like it, but at least you're still in control. You're still the expert in your work. And over time, if it's any good, it'll find its way into the bigger picture. And it may be great and not find its way into the bigger, like Van Gogh didn't when he was alive. But who's to say what's good and what's bad in the end? So for one's own life, I think that's where you go. You find your own thing, you relate to it, it's your strength, and you can have a pretty good life if you don't look over your shoulder and try and be what the next person is, because you can't be what they are anyway. So that's what I tell kids, and I try to do that myself.